Hello, Sassy Nari. Thank you for joining me today. Last year, I read quite a few books as per my standards. It happened only because I decided to enjoy reading rather than trying to learn something from every book. Now, both me and my husband like reading, so it came naturally to Idhaya. And she also enjoys reading, but not all kids or even all adults are into it. And no, I'm not asking you to become a reader or turn your child into one. But if you feel that reading can help your kids in some ways and you want them to become interested in reading, then this episode is for you. You'll even get some ideas about how reading helps adults. मेरे साथ है मेनका रमन, who is a children's book author and a communications consultant. She has written picture books, chapter books, and a middle grade novel. Menaka's books include Gappu Can't Dance, Topi Rockets from Thumba, How to Reach Mars and Other Impossible Things, and The Great Escape. Her book, Loki Takes Guard, won the Valley of Words Award for writing for young adults. Before hearing from Menaka, please follow Little Fixes on your podcast app and share this episode with someone you care about. Hey Sassy Nari, welcome to Little Fixes. This is your host Matri, a social media professional, a mother, and a simple yet sassy woman just like you. Join me for 3 simple and practical ideas that help you in transforming into your best self. This mental health and personal growth podcast is a reminder that you matter. And now to our guest. Hi Menka, welcome to Little Fixes.
Hi, Maitri. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
So, I am very excited about speaking to an author on my podcast. I have spoken to a few authors, and for some reason, I'm always very excited about talking to authors, probably because I love reading. So, I'm very happy to have you here. And the first thing that I want to know from you that how did you get into writing for kids?
Right. I never thought I'd be a children's book author
Hmm.
at any point of time, but between 2016 and 2019, I found myself working at Pratham Books,
Mhm.
which is a non-profit which makes picture books for children in multiple Indian languages. And I was working on their platform Storyweaver, which is an open source platform of books for children. And I was doing marketing and social media and communications and that kind of work. I've always been writing in other formats, and I actually at that point was writing a parenting column, which is something I've been doing on and off since I've been a parent, which is about 15 years now. So I was writing a parenting column, which was quite no serious advice, very kind of tongue in cheek and humorous look at parenting and what it takes to raise children today. And there was an editor at Pratham Books, Bijal Vacharajani. She's still a senior commissioning editor at Pratham Books. And she said, have you ever thought about writing books for children? And I said, no, I haven't. I mean, that's nothing that's crossed my mind. And she said, I think you should write something. And I want to read something that you've written. So, I thought she was joking. And so I went home. And I think that week, I just kept it. I really thought it was just, one of those fun things you do at work with your colleagues. So I wrote a story in rhyme about a boy who's having dinner and a bat comes inside the house. And it's called Amma, There's a Bat in My Sambar.
Hmm.
And I just really went and I said, oh, look, Bijal, I've written something for you. And I read it out quite in a very silly way, like I performed in front of the entire office because honestly, I thought it was a joke. I didn't think she was being serious, but she really liked it. And she said, I'm going to publish this as a picture book.
Wow.
And and I was like, if I knew you were actually going to do it, I would have written something better. She's like, no, I love it. And I'm going to publish this. So that was my kind of the first time I wrote something for children. And, as a parent, I have 2 boys who are 15 and 12 now. But so much of, those early years was spent reading to them, through the day at bedtime and, reading picture books and chapter books were a big, big part of, those early years. So I thought it was really lovely to be able to contribute to that space, to be able to write books for children and to kind of be a part of other parents' shared experience with their children in those formative years. So that's kind of how it started off. And that's been about maybe 5 years ago. And since then, I've written over 15 books for children, mostly picture books, chapter books, illustrated books, and 1 novel. So yeah, it just
Very
happened.
interesting. Social media और marketing करते करते you started writing and now you are a full-time author.
I'm a full-time author when I find the time for it. I
Hmm.
now work actually with a podcast production company here in Bangalore
Ah.
called Vaka Media. I do some production for them. I still do some writing and scripting and social media, and kind of it's a small team.
Hmm.
Yes, so yeah, that's kind of my day job. That's what I do, and I still love to. I make sure I find time to write with
Oh,
everything else
wow,
going
that's
on.
great. And from reading to your kids to now writing, it's been a long time. As you said, you have been parent for almost 15 years now. So, Menka, what have been your observation over the years when it comes to kids and reading?
I think one thing I've definitely seen over the last few years is that there has been a real push in wanting to get children to read more, which is, a
Hmm.
push that you see from schools, from parents, from educators, librarians. There has been like a very renewed push, or at least we're seeing more of that effort and intent because of social media.
Hmm.
I know there is a lot of alarming kind of reports and statistics which say that children aren't reading anymore and that there's a drop in children's reading because of gadgets and social media and because of all of these other things. And yes, I mean, Scholastic, which is a publishing house, does, an annual children and family reading survey. And we are
Hmm.
definitely seeing that, in that early age group of, say, when children are in early primary, children love to read. Children think that reading for fun is important. Parents also agree with this. Children make time to do this. But you are seeing that as children get older and they're going into middle and high school, that there's a decline in that. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because other extracurricular activities take over, because academics sometimes takes priority. So even parents who really think that reading is very, very important when a child is in primary, by middle and high school, they're like, no, the only thing you should be reading are your textbooks and you should be
Hmm.
studying for exams. And that kind of a sentiment kicks in, right?
Hmm.
So I think we are seeing that yes, there is a drop. Yes, there is, and it's for a number of reasons. But I also have seen as an author and as a parent, and now as an author, I go to a lot of literary festivals in cities. I get invited by schools for their own lit fests. I get invited to by librarians to come and do sessions, one on one with their students in schools. And I can also see, on the other hand, that there is, and children are so excited. Children are always excited to meet authors, to come across new books, and they want to read. So I know there's a lot of conflicting kind of, on the one hand, you're saying, oh, but nobody is reading anymore. But on the other hand, you go to a lit fest and there are like 40 children there who are excited to meet you and talk to you and ask you all sorts of questions. So I think you're always going to kind of have these two sides of it. But one thing, if I've noticed, is that there is a real kind of effort, I think, in schools and amongst parents, to want to get their children to read more, which is always,
Hmm.
I think, a wonderful thing.
Yeah. See, I did not grow up reading. I really loved reading as a kid. बट उस टाइम जिस जगह मैं रहती थी उस वहाँ पे इतना नहीं था कि आपको बच्चों को बहुत बुक्स अलग अलग तरह की पढ़ानी है. तो इन आवर समर वेकेशंस माय फादर यूज्ड टू गेट बुक्स फॉर अस फ्रॉम हिज ऑफिस लाइब्रेरी. तो उसमें वो बुक्स आपको 15 दिन रखने के लिए मिलती थी. उसके बाद यू कुड चेंज. तो वो जैसे ही बुक लेकर आते थे, आई यूज्ड टू फिनिश 2 बुक्स इन 2 days. तो मुझे ये पता था कि मुझे पढ़ना अच्छा लगता है. मतलब पढ़ाई करना नहीं अच्छा लगता था, बट आई यूज्ड टू लव रीडिंग. स्कूल की जितनी बुक्स होती थी, आई यूज्ड टू रीड देम ऑल बिफोर द सेशन स्टार्टेड. और मेरा जब रीडिंग करना मैंने स्टार्ट किया जब मेरी जॉब लगी. उसके बाद मैंने अपनी बुक्स खरीदना शुरू किया और पढ़ना शुरू किया. एंड व्हेन आई बिकेम अ पेरेंट बैक इन 2017, तब तक सोशल मीडिया पे रीडिंग वाला फेज था, या उसको रीडिंग को ज़्यादा प्रमोट करना था, वो शुरू हो चुका था. एंड माई डॉटर वॉज 2.5 months ओल्ड. तब से मैंने उसको बुक्स देना शुरू कर दिया. एंड नाउ शी कैन रीड वेरी वेल. लाइक शी इज 6, बट 8-9 ईयर्स तक के, 10 ईयर्स तक के बच्चों की बुक्स भी वो पढ़ लेती है.
Right.
तो आई हैव सीन दैट, एंड आई हैव ऑब्वियसली सीन कि शी इज़ वेरी इंटरेस्टेड. लेकिन कई बार मैंने ये भी देखा है कि एक अलग तरह का प्रेशर भी पेरेंट्स पे आ जाता है. लाइक आई लाइक रीडिंग, माय हस्बैंड लाइक्स रीडिंग, तो शी हैज़ दैट एनवायरनमेंट. बट बहुत सारे ऐसे पेरेंट्स होते हैं जिनको रीडिंग करना मतलब इतना नहीं होता है, उनको इंटरेस्ट नहीं होता है. बट कई बार लोग कहते हैं, अरे तुम पढ़ते नहीं हो अपने बच्चे के साथ बुक, क्यों नहीं पढ़ते हो, उसको पढ़ाना बहुत ज़रूरी है, रीडिंग इज़ गुड फॉर किड्स. तो मैंने इस लेवल का मतलब, मे बी इट इज़ बॉर्डर लाइन शेमिंग ऑल्सो, आई एम नॉट श्योर, बट ये वाला साइड भी मैंने इसका देखा है. तो इसके बारे में आप क्या बोलोगे?
No, I totally agree with you. I think there's a certain kind of peer pressure that's set in, both amongst
Hmm.
parents and amongst children, right? So there's a certain kind of peer pressure that's set in to kind of be seen as having a child who loves reading. And that is, and I don't mean to offend anyone listening to this, but sometimes I think parents also like to a little bit show off on social media with like, oh, but
हाँ हाँ
my
हाँ
8-year-old has read all the Harry Potter books already, or and that builds in a certain, and we do live in that age where that, other parents see this and then they start worrying and they think, oh, but, why hasn't my child read Harry Potter yet? And there's a lot of that pressure that sets in, right? Uh,
Hmm.
so I think we are seeing that there is this kind of pressure that our children should be readers. But I think
Yeah.
what we need to question as parents is, why do we want our children to be readers?
Hmm.
That's a question we have to ask ourselves. And like you yourself said in the question, there's this kind of attitude that's set in that reading is good for you, that reading is good for
Hmm.
children, that when children read, and these are of course are all true things, that when children
Hmm.
read they do
Yeah.
well academically, they have better outcomes in life. There are so many kind of long studies which have shown all these things. They could get better marks in exams, they go to better colleges, they can get better jobs. All of these things are built in, right? So I feel sometimes that's the driving reason why parents want their children to read. And I feel what we are missing out on is that fundamentally reading is for pleasure and the reading is for
Hmm.
joy. And it brings you a joy, a happiness, a sense of content that is really, I think, quite unmatched in any other activity. I'm a big reader. I have been since I was a child. It's now, I was just thinking today and I thought, yeah, actually reading is a form of self-care for me. It's something that I
Hmm.
do to kind of nourish myself mentally, and to kind of take time out. So I think parents need to see, why do you want your children to read? If you only want your child to read because it's good for them,
Hmm.
because and there are all these kind of academic benefits to it and things like that, then I'm really questioning if that should be the driving motivation for wanting a reader as a child, right? But if you kind of make that little switch for yourself and say, I want my child to read because it's a pleasurable activity, because it's a
Hmm.
fun activity, it's joyous, then I think a lot of those tussles that will happen, or that kind of feeling of, oh, but that fear, oh, why isn't my child reading? Why isn't my child reading? That I think that kind of slips away. And I also sometimes think, so my two boys, my younger one is a big reader. My older one likes reading graphic novels. He writes reading manga, comics, that kind of thing. My younger one is a far more kind of has a lot more interests when it comes to reading. That's okay. That's perfectly
Yeah.
all right. I think we also need to widen our understanding of what it means to be a reader. Graphic novels are books. Reading comics is reading.
Hmm.
Manga is reading. If your child is into manga, that's great. So I'm saying, we should kind of make those little adjustments as parents, as to in our own minds. And I think we'll feel differently about whether our child is reading or not. And I think even in spite of all that, beyond all of that, if your child doesn't take to reading, that's nothing to beat yourself up over as a parent. It's, doesn't mean that you've kind of failed your children in some way or anything like that. It's perfectly okay. And I really hope parents kind of can take that message home as well.
Hmm. या तो इसी चीज से छोटा सा यू टर्न लेते हैं कि आपने बोला कि रीडिंग के बहुत सारे बेनिफिट्स हैं एंड वी ऑल नो कि हाँ बेनिफिट्स हैं बट व्हाट आर दे
So I'll tell you first, but I think for me, the benefits of reading are
हम्म
personally, and for what I would like to, and then of course, then there are the standard kind of academic benefits and all of that. I think, all of us, we are living in a time where our attention is being eroded, right? And it's not just children, it's parents as well. Uh, you want to pick up your phone every 60 seconds and see if someone has responded to an email, or you have some notification and you want to go and see what it is. And, there's kind of data now that shows that in US universities, students at like, Ivy League universities in America cannot focus on a task for longer than 60 seconds. And the
हम्म
average office worker can only focus on a task for 3 minutes. Um, Whereas when you read, and if you read deeply, you are forced to pay attention. You are forced, reading brings that out in you. It brings out that ability to really deeply engage with text, understand what's happening. understand the subtext in a story. And it really kind of helps you restore that attention. I find that when we read every day for periods of time, it really helps restore that attention, which is being stolen from us by our phones, by OTT, by everything else, right? So I think one is it really helps, and that feeling of that very scattered feeling that many of us have, right? My mind sometimes feels like it's thinking of so many things at the same time. But when I sit down with a book, and if my phone is not near me and it's in another room somewhere on silent, I'm able to really, really focus. So it renews and restores our sense of attention. I think the benefits of reading are also that it opens our minds to this whole world outside us, uh, and just different people's realities, different people's experiences, in other parts of the world. And I think especially in times like today, where there is such a sense of fracturing of of who we can of what we think of other people, who we think is good and bad, and right and wrong and things like that. I think books can really help open up our minds to other people's lived realities. And I think that's so important. So it builds empathy in the reader. When you're reading someone else's story, in a way you are kind of walking in their shoes while you're reading their life, or you're reading what's happening to them. And that renews your sense of empathy. It helps you build and nourish that empathy that you have for others, which I think is so important, um, for children and for adults. It also helps you open up your own kind of, we all kind of think that, oh, I know this, I'm right about this, and this is my opinion and I'm going to stick to it. Again, books can help you understand the other side of that conversation, know what else is happening. So I think these are some of the benefits, opening up, doors and windows to the world, which is so wonderful. And I think especially for children on the other side, while that also matters, for many young people to be able to read a book and see themselves reflected in that book, and to see that, oh, I identify with this person. This person's experiences are like mine. So if I can give you an example, I wrote a book a few years ago called Loki Takes Guard, about a young girl who wants to play cricket and who's kind of told by the local cricket team, you're the only girl and we can't let you play. And, the story kind of takes off from there. The number of young girls who wrote to me or who met me at schools and lit fests and library sessions and things like that, who said, oh my God, that's exactly what's happened to me. I have been through that so many times in the building. When I want to go down and play cricket with the boys in my building, they're like, no, no, you're a girl. And, they chase me off and they kind of won't include me and things like that. So I think it's so important to have that feeling of recognition, to see yourself reflected in your stories validates your own experience. So I think reading matters so much for that as well. Of course, there are all the other, your vocabulary improves, you become a better writer, you become a better communicator. All of those things also, are there. The more you read, the more your language develops. Um, you're able to put those skills to use in other parts of your life as well. But for me, it's really the first part of my answer. It's that increased empathy. It's seeing what the world outside of your own world looks like. And it's seeing your experiences reflected in a book.
एंड मेनका, डू यू थिंक रीडिंग इज बेटर देन वॉचिंग द सेम थिंग? क्योंकि बहुत सारी जो बुक्स हैं उनके ऊपर स्टोरीज आती हैं, मतलब मूवीज या सीरीज बन जाती हैं, या फिर कई बार इंडिपेंडेंटली भी बच्चों के लिए या सभी के लिए कंटेंट रहता है. तो डू यू थिंक वन मीडियम इज बेटर देन अदर, और इफ इट इज, व्हाई?
So, I think that I think screens are here to stay. I think our devices are here to stay. I think OTT is here to stay. All of that, right? And I think they're all wonderful in many ways, because they are all bringing wonderful stories, wonderful narratives, wonderful characters into our lives and into the lives of children as well. But I think when you have a book which is, say, 400 pages long or 500 pages long, and there's so much kind of character development that happens, there are so many kind of small little things that the writer brings in certain scenes, certain nuances, in certain moments. It's hard for for anyone to take that and exactly replicate it into like an hour and a half long movie is difficult. So I think movies are always going to miss out certain things in the written text which really bring the narrative alive, which really enrich the story. So in our house, the rule is simple, and I know a lot of parents follow that, is that you have to read the book first before you watch the movie. So we always try and stick to that. If you want to watch this movie, great, but you're going to have to try and read the book first before you go into it. I think listening. I listen to a lot of audiobooks when I'm going on walks, when I'm, in the car on long journeys, when I travel and things like that. So I think audiobooks are a fantastic way. And especially when you look at, there's also been a growing realization that, of course, now there are children who have reading difficulties, there are children who have learning difficulties, neurodiverse children, children, with dyslexia and things like that. I think then what's wonderful is something like an audiobook can bring that reading experience to them. For children who do have these difficulties, sitting down to read a book could be a very hard thing for them to do. And you don't want them getting put off by that experience and saying and feeling like, oh, but books aren't for me because I'm struggling to read. So I think in those kind of situations, when you bring in an audiobook, you're allowing them to enjoy the story, to enjoy that experience, but in a way which works for them. So I think it's wonderful we have so many different ways of bringing stories to our children. Of course, I'm always going to be, partial to the written word, but I think it's time we embrace all these different formats, especially for our children, and kind of be able to bring them what it is they need the most and what they're able to really enjoy and pick up.
Mm-hmm. I agree, completely agree with you on this. I am also more of a written word person. Like I have tried audiobooks, but I just could not get hooked on to them. मतलब मुझे लगता है कि नहीं पढ़ो, पढ़ने से जो टेक अवेज आते हैं वो अलग होते हैं, और हाईलाइट कर लो या फिर उस चीज़ को बार बार पढ़ लो. यू कैन गो बैक इजीली एनी टाइम. तो आई एग्री विद यू ऑन दिस कि रिटन वर्ड्स मतलब इट इज सम काइंड ऑफ प्रेफरेंस ऑल्सो, कि सबकी अपनी अपनी प्रेफरेंस होती है. एंड नाउ बिकॉज वी आर एक्सपोज टू सो मैनी डिफरेंट मीडियम्स, धीरे धीरे सबकी अपनी अपनी एक प्रेफरेंस बनती चली जाती है. एंड दैट इज ऑल्सो गुड. बट if someone wants to turn their kids into readers, मतलब उन्हें लगता है कि हाँ बेनिफिट्स हैं and my kid should also reap those benefits. Maybe the kid is not 5 anymore, कि वो थोड़ा बड़ा हो गया है और उसको लगता है कि अरे मैंने कभी नहीं पढ़ा, क्यों पढ़ूँ मैं, मुझे नहीं पढ़ना, स्कूल की पढ़ाई बहुत है, बाकी आई विल डू माई थिंग. तो डू यू हैव एनी सजेशंस फॉर देम, एनी आइडियाज कि कैसे उनको हम रीडर्स बना सकते हैं? मतलब इट्स नॉट लाइक कि बिल्कुल उनको हमें एविड रीडर्स बनाना ही है, बट इंटरेस्ट जनरेट करने के लिए रीडिंग में हम क्या कर सकते हैं?
So I think there are a number of things that parents can do. For me, the foremost one is to hand over the choice of what your children want to read to your children. I think as parents, we want them to read what we read as children, because we want them to share that kind of love of, certain authors, certain books, genres, that kind of thing. So as parents, we want, and, till your children are a certain age, of course, you will be the one who's kind of picking books for them or helping them select books and things like that. I think as our children get older, they start having their own tastes, their own preferences. I like this kind of book. I don't like this kind of book. And it's in everything, right? It's what they listen to, what they watch, what they wear, everything. Our children are becoming their own individual people, and we need to respect that individuality. So I think the first thing is to give them choice and to not kind of, I mean, I've seen so often at bookstores or at libraries or at book fairs, parents will come in with their children and their child will pick up these, 3, 4 books very excitedly. These are children who are maybe 8, 9, 10 in that age group, and they'll come up to their parents with these books and say, oh, I want to get all these books. And I've seen how parents will kind of look at the books and look at the cover and look at the back, and they'll be like, oh, but you don't want to read this. This is not what you should be reading, I think you should get this instead. And they'll kind of then pass on their own preference and say, get these 3 books instead, or get this 1 book instead. Now, that's a sure shot way to diminish any interest a child might have in reading. Your child has picked something that they think they're going to be interested in. And you know what? They might try reading that book and they might not like it. That's also okay. Reading is all about the journey to becoming a reader, is not about reading the right kind of books, the fashionable books, the good books. It's not about that. The journey to becoming a reader is trial and error. It's like, oh, I'm going to try this. Do I like this? Is there something in this for me? And then either you'll find that there is, which is wonderful, you'll go on to the next book, you'll start reading and you'll be like, actually, this is not what I wanted. This is not for me. And it's okay to stop reading a book and to put it down and pick up something else. So this kind of journey of letting our children discover what they like reading, what they want to read, the formats in which they want to read it, I think that's something parents have to embrace more. So, taking them to the library, if you're lucky enough to have a library, in your locality, or if your children's school has a library, to encourage them to borrow books, to take them to bookstores. I live in Bangalore, which is a book lover's paradise. We have lots of bookstores. We have lots of secondhand bookstores. So, usually in the summer, my children will get 3-4 books and we'll read them, and then we'll go to the secondhand bookstore and exchange them for store credit, and they'll get the next set of books. So, taking them to bookshops, taking them to libraries, taking them to lit fests if they're happening in your city, so that they can meet authors, meet illustrators, meet translators. That's all really so important. And I think these are all the ways in which we can build an excitement and a love of reading, get them to swap books with their friends. These are all things. But I think that choice, allowing your child and to keep your opinion to yourself as a parent, which I know is very hard. It's so hard. We all want to say, but why are you reading this? Or, even to say things like, you're too old to be reading this, or you're too young to read this. Now, of course, I understand that there are certain books with very mature themes, with violence, with things like that, which that's a call then that as parents we take. But there are some times where we're like, if a child will, if those things, if that's not the issue, and if you don't have those concerns, let your child try to read that book. They will take what they can from the story, or they themselves will find out that, oh, this is not for me. I'll try again later. So we have to really respect our children here in this space. We have to, and there's a lovely set of things called the ten rules for a reader. It's by a French author. I'll try and find the link. You can put it in your show notes. But these are all the things that you have the right to choose. You have the right to give up a book. You have a right to read whatever you like, whenever you like. All of those things in it. So I think it's really important to let our children make those choices, make those mistakes. I make mistakes as a reader now. There are some books which I think I'm really going to love, and then it's just not for me.
Yeah.
I have learned not to force myself to finish a book if I'm not enjoying it. I will put it down. Maybe it's not the right time for me to read that book. I might enjoy it a few years down the line. But I really think we need to encourage our children, and we need to learn that skill as parents. The other thing I want to say is this whole idea of read a book and then write a book report about it. I think our children do enough of that at school, right? There's enough of essay writing and all of that in school, which is built into their curriculum. And unless your child wants to do that themselves, that's wonderful. But I think don't make that something that we force upon them. Don't say, now you've read this book, very good, write 1,000 words for me as to why you liked it. Don't do that. So those are just some things which I would suggest. But yeah, I'd love to know if you have any recommendations, things you tell other parents that might read.
नहीं, आई डोंट टेल एनीथिंग, आई जस्ट से कि डोंट फोर्स, कि अगर उसको नहीं पढ़ना है तो मत पढ़ाओ. एंड आई थिंक चॉइस वाली बात जो आपने बोली वो काफ़ी इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्योंकि ना चाहते हुए भी आई डू दिस टू माई डॉटर. लाइक वी कीप गोइंग टू डिफरेंट बुक स्टोर्स, एंड एज सुन एज शी एंटर्स शी हैज़ सम फॉन्ड मेमोरीज अटैच्ड विद पेपा. तो कभी कभी वो पेपा की बुक उठा लाती है, एंड आई एम लाइक, यू आर 6 नाउ, ये 3 साल के बच्चों की बुक है, डोंट रीड इट, पुट इट बैक. या फिर शी पिक्स, अगर वो किसी थोड़ी सी बड़े बच्चे की लाई, लाइक 8-9 years की लाई, तो आई एम हैप्पी कि हाँ चलो ये पढ़ेगी, तो इसको पढ़ना आएगा, तो फिर भी आई लेट हर रीड डिपेंडिंग ऑन द कंटेंट. बट बच्चों वाली और छोटे बच्चों वाली आई डोंट लेट हर रीड नाउ. बट आई थिंक बिकॉज शी इज इंटरेस्टेड, कभी कभी चलता है, अगर उसका मन है तो पढ़ लेने देना चाहिए, विच आई एम रियलाइजिंग राइट नाउ. And she actually really loved your book, How to Reach Mars and Other Impossible Things. तो I asked her कैसी है book. तो पहले तो she said कि क्या बताया, क्या ये सही में बैंगलोर में सेंटर है. तो मुझे भी नहीं पता था. आई गूगल्ड, मैंने देखा, मैंने कहा हाँ ये UR राव सेंटर एक्चुअली में है बैंगलोर में. तो शी सेड कि हम भी जा सकते हैं. अच्छा, ये जो बच्ची है इसको साइंटिस्ट से कैसे मिलने को मिल गया. तो शी वॉज वेरी इंटरेस्टेड. फिर मैंने, कैसी लगी आपको? दिस इज द बेस्ट बुक एवर. Like,
How
okay.
lovely. Thank you so much.
तो शी रियली लाइक्ड इट एंड आई ऑल्सो रेड इट. उसमें बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं जो मुझे भी नहीं पता थी. तो यू मस्ट हैव you have written मतलब mentioned also that you did a lot of research
Yeah,
for the book. You met scientists actually and spoke to them.
that's
तो
right.
हाउ डू यू डिसाइड व्हाट टू राइट? आप पहले से एक रनिंग लिस्ट रखते हो कि इन टॉपिक्स पे मुझे बुक लिखनी है, या फिर यू सी समथिंग कि हाँ ये चीज़ है, इस इशू को मुझे एड्रेस करना है. जैसे ये जो बुक है, इसमें आपने ये विमेन साइंटिस्ट वाला इशू एड्रेस किया है विदाउट बीइंग टू डायरेक्ट अबाउट इट, बट उसको आपने बताया है. तो कैसे डिसाइड किया आपने?
So it's always a mix of things. So there are sometimes, so very often ideas for the books that I write come in some snatch of a conversation. I'll hear someone will say something to somebody else, or I'll see something, somewhere, or it's something that's actually happened in one of my children's lives. So I kind of take a little part of that and I write a book out of it, and I see if there's a story there. But in terms of, and then there's of course books which I'm commissioned to write. So this is an editor at a publishing house saying, would you like to write about this? So before I wrote the Mars book, a few years ago I wrote a book called Topi Rockets from Thumba, which is about India's first rocket launch in 1963 from a small fishing village in Kerala. And I didn't know about that. So the my editor at the time, Smith Zaveri, she sent me just a photo, and it's a very iconic photograph now. It's a black and white picture of two men pushing a cycle with the nose cone of a rocket
Yeah.
strapped to the back of it. And she gave me a link, and she said, "Would you like to write about this? This is something that I've always been so fascinated by." And of course, when I went and then read the story, I thought, wow, what an iconic moment in history. What a time in Indian history. Also, because the place where they chose this rocket launch to happen was a small fishing village where nothing ever interesting happened, right? It's everyone goes about their lives. So for me, the entry point into that story was, what would it be like to be a child living in this village where everyone fishes, you go to church, you go to school, you live your life, and then suddenly like some 200 scientists have come to your village and they're like building a rocket, in your
Hmm.
church. So I thought that must have been so the idea of that came from there. And of course, that book did really well. And then Simran Kaur, who's the editor for the Mars book, a few years later, wrote to me and said, I want to write something about science and gender and women in science fields and things like that. And uh, why don't we use Mangalyan as the kind of the basis for that? Because children love space. This is something I didn't know myself. When I go to schools, children are fascinated by space. Children know all
Yeah.
sorts of information. They know more than I do about space, by the way. They know everything. So there's a lot of interest in this area. So she said, would you like to? So again, with this, it was the idea of what is the entry point into the story. And of course, then I use the draw a scientist test and that whole kind of
Hmm.
research that's been building over decades, to kind of address the gender angle of it, and also to kind of talk about the actual mission itself. So it's always a combination between being asked to write something, which is a terribly big honor and privilege and responsibility.
Yeah.
And then there are my own madcap ideas, which I have. And I actually do have a little notebook where I write down all my crazy ideas, one line ideas of books that I'd like to write and stories I want to tell.
Okay, I have seen some of those ideas on your Instagram also. Like you
Yeah.
post little post-its कि ये कहाँ जाएगा story में, या things like that. So it is also very interesting to see what goes on in an author's mind. So it was lovely speaking with you, Menika. And before I let you go, please tell us a little more about your work, and also how can people connect with you?
Sure. Thank you. So, like I said, I've written, I think, about 16 books for children now. A majority of them are picture books. Um, then there's some illustrated books like the Topi Rockets and the Mars book. I've written some chapter books. There's a whole book I have with Duckbill, which is about a boy who wants to escape maths class and tries to escape school with his friends. And then I've written a novel as well about a girl who wants to play cricket. I think my way to approach most of the stories I want to tell is with an element of humor in them. I think just humor and making jokes and having fun just makes everything about life a little easier to bear and a little easier to manage. So there's always, I think that's one thing. There's always an element of humor and silliness and goofiness in my books. Um, I have 2 books coming out next year. One is again a novel and another picture book. And I have lots of ideas for new books, which I hope I get to tell. You can connect with me, of course. I have a website, menakaraman.in. That's menakaraman.in. And I'm on Instagram at Mothership80, which is my Instagram handle. And I always love hearing from readers and from educators and librarians and things like that. And I love hearing from readers. It's the best thing. It's the best thing to meet someone who's read my book and said, oh, I really like that. And why did you do this? And children are very upfront. They'll ask me but why did you do this? Like, I didn't like that. So I had answers for them. So yeah, please, I would love to hear from anyone who's read my books. And it's always a wonderful thing.
Wonderful. So it was lovely speaking with you, Menaka, and I wish you all the success with your upcoming books. And thank you so much for being on Little Fixes and sharing your insights about reading with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Maitri. I had a lovely time.
अगर आपको ये एपिसोड वैल्यूएबल लगा तो प्लीज हेल्प लिटिल फिक्सेस रीच मोर पीपल बाय शेयरिंग इट विद समवन यू केयर अबाउट. यू कैन ऑल्सो गिव अस अ शाउट आउट ऑन इंस्टाग्राम. मेरा हैंडल है @littlefixespodcast. दिस हेल्प्स मी इन ग्रोइंग द पॉडकास्ट और बहुत सारे और लोगों की हेल्प भी होती है इसको सुन के. आई एम ग्रेटफुल फॉर योर टाइम. अब मिलते हैं नेक्स्ट वेडनेसडे को. तब तक के लिए खुद से प्यार करते रहो और सदा सैसी रहो. बाय. When I started this podcast in 2019, I didn't know much about the tools available and struggled with poor audio quality, blurry videos, and even losing the recording. Now I have switched to Zencastr. Zencastr not only gives me high quality audio and video podcast production, but also keeps the recording safe with its multi-layer backups even when the internet is unstable. It has a post-production feature which automatically removes sounds like and also reduces background noise with a click of a button. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code LFP and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. Zencastr is free to try and their hobbies plan is always free.